everyone, and welcome to Yomi's Flight School. In episode 1, I'm going to be talking about flight controls and basic spaceship movement. I'll just show you what we're doing here. I am flying an Origin 300i, which is the kind of tier 2 ship which you might upgrade to after you finish with the Aurora, which is the starter ship. It's a good jack-of-all-trades ship with good performance and balanced kind of attributes. It's pretty cheap in the REC store, so after playing a few multiplayer matches you should be able to rent one for a week if you want to give it a go yourself. This ship has a top speed of 230 meters a second. Alright, so let's talk about the controls. We'll start off with the rotational axes. So the terminology of these is quite important. There might be a few different names for some of them, but there are kind of established standards which I will try to stick to. So the first axis we're going to talk about is pitch. This is where you move the nose of your ship up and down. By default, this is mapped to the y-axis of the mouse or a joystick if you're using one. Kind of the counterpart to pitch is yaw, which is movement in the kind of the horizontal plane. So your nose will point to the left and to the right, and by default this is on the x-axis of the mouse. The third rotational axis is roll. Now by default this is on A and D on a keyboard to rotate clockwise and counterclockwise. Some people prefer to have roll on the x-axis of their mouse or joystick, so that on the right hand you control pitch and roll, and on the left hand or pedals or something you control yaw. And this is kind of a holdover from atmospheric flight games where the yaw is a very weak minor effect and you need to use roll primarily to maneuver. This isn't actually the case in Star Citizen, and I would personally recommend that you stick with pitch and yaw, as this makes aiming at targets quite easy for people who are used to using a mouse. You just point at the target and click and you can shoot it. Now, the mouse has two analog axes in that you can move the mouse slowly or quickly, and that will affect how fast your nose is pointing, or similarly if you have roll on it you can roll quickly or slowly. But keyboards are just buttons, you're either pressing it or you're not, so you have to rotate at 100% speed or not at all. If you have some other kind of controller, like the one I built, you can do all of these things as slowly as you like, so I can do a very slow roll by rotating my controller slightly. This might be also bound to the twist axis on a stick, which can so you have all three rotations in your right hand, which is quite convenient. So the way the flight control works in this game, we're in coupled mode by the way. If you look here on the lower right, it says coupled and that's lit up. I can turn it off or turn it on again. G-Safe and Constab are two other modes which aren't particularly important for this discussion. G-Safe just limits how fast you accelerate to try and stop you from blacking out, and Constab lets you either slide around a bit if you turn it off, or less sliding if it's turned on. And the bottom option, ESP, Enhanced Stick Precision, is only relevant for combat, which we will get to later. Alright, so we've covered pitch, roll and yaw, which are the three rotational axes, which are used to point the nose of your ship around. Next we will look at the three translational axes. Now, the first and the most important of these is the longitudinal axis, which is forwards and backwards. By default, this is mapped to W and S on the keyboard. If you look here in the lower right, this is your throttle indicator. If I hold W, this will increase. It's at 20% now, which means my ship will aim for a target velocity of 20% of the ship's maximum allowed speed of 230 meters a second. If I hold W some more, that will increase. I can double tap to jump it to 100, and I can double tap S to move it to 0, which means my ship will aim for velocity of 0 and will stop. So that's how you'll mostly be travelling around, forwards, because then you can see where you're going, and that is quite useful. If you have a HOTAS, a hands-on throttle and stick, you'll just have a physical throttle that you'll move all the way forward to set it to 100, or all the way back to set it to 0, or in between to set it intermediately. What I've actually done is, using a 360 controller, I have used a virtual joystick to mirror the analog triggers, because the game sees 360 controls, sees the triggers as buttons in CryEngine. So I've had to make a virtual joystick so that it has an analog input. So I'm just using this like a racing game where it's called the Longitudinal strafe command, where if I squeeze down the trigger 100%, it will set my velocity, my target velocity to 100%, although it doesn't show on the throttle indicator. If I squeeze it halfway, then it will go to halfway, although that's 115 meters a second, I guess. It's hard to use exactly, but you can quickly set the target to anything. So if I let go, the target velocity will be 0, and the ship will quickly try to stop. This is unique in allowing me to travel backwards in decoupled mode, which you can set to a button input, but then you have to set your velocity to minus 100%, whereas I can set it to minus 10%, say, and slowly drift back. There you can see it, though you can't when the planet's too bright, but I can set my velocity to minus a very few percent backwards. I can go very slowly backwards. Alright, so those that was the throttle or longitudinal strafe, which is how you go forwards and backwards. In a 6 degrees of freedom game, there are 3 rotations, which we looked at, and also 3 translations. Now we've covered one of them, and the other 2, as you might imagine, are strafing vertically and horizontally. So Q and E by default are horizontal strafe. If you're holding down Q, your horizontal velocity will be set to 100% to the left, which is 230 meters a second, and your ship will try to get to that. If you let go, your target velocity will be 0, and you will quickly slow to a stop. I'll just move back. So I'm holding E, that sets my velocity to 100% to the right, and when I let go, I will quickly decelerate to nothing. Alright, and a similar thing with vertical strafing, which are on R and F. We're blacking out a bit there because pilots don't like vertical Gs. On my controller, I'm using a thumbstick to control my strafe, so I can actually strafe slowly. If I get close to this, try not to crash right into it, I can strafe up incredibly slowly. I'm very slowly drifting up here. I can go as fast as I like. I can go at intermediate speed or a high speed where I will try to get to 230 meters a second. And you can see as I was actually losing my vertical speed there, that required an acceleration which made me black out. Alright, so these are all the 6 degrees of freedom as it's known in the game. And now we're going to go to Old Van der Waal Raceway to practice some basic navigation around the track and some different strategies for doing that, which might be quite difficult for a beginner. Alright, I'll see you in a moment. Now, something I didn't mention in the last video is that with mouse control, if you look at this blue circle which is wiggling around, that's where you're looking, also where your gimbaled guns are aiming. But your ship's nose, which is the little cross there right in the centre that doesn't move relative to your ship, they aren't necessarily lined up, and you're free to move your mouse around. This is kind of virtual joystick mode, and it means that if you don't move your mouse, I'm just leaving it still, your ship will keep rotating with its target speed proportional to how far away the mouse is from the your ship's nose. So if you spin it right round to the side and leave it, you'll start rotating at a really high speed. So that's one way of using it, which is kind of a virtual joystick. And there's another way, if you press Control and C to toggle them, where they're coupled together, and it just acts like a normal pointer in a first-person shooter game, where if you move your mouse to the right and then leave it there, your nose will move around to the right and then stop. So it's tied more to just the position of the mouse is your angular position, rather than the position of the mouse being tied to the angular speed. Right, so let's just rotate nice and straight here. So what we want to do here, just to practice some basic flying and kind of nose control. So we're just going to set the throttle to quite a low speed, so 25% if you look down there on the bottom left. That's hard to see against the white background. Hopefully they'll let us change the colours in a patch soon, because that would be nice to actually be able to see this blue stuff against a blue sky. We set the throttle to 25%, and we're just going to basically cruise around this racetrack. So the basic strategy, one of them, is just to use pitch and yaw to aim where you're going. So the next gate is over there on the right. I've got a separate aiming control, don't you worry about that. So we're going to just head down here for a while, and then we're just going to move the nose of the ship round and aim for the gate. So we might want to head a bit more over to the left and then meet it straight on instead of heading through at a worse angle. So in coupled mode, this is all you basically need to worry about at low speeds. Your ship can do quite a tight corner at low speeds, and it will just try to just head forward, straight forwards. So yeah, you can turn basically as quickly as you want at low speed, and you don't have to worry about drifting sideways. You can just head round, and the next gate is coming up here on the right. So we'll just point the nose towards that, and we'll eventually get there. Another strategy, which we're going to do now, is using roll and pitch. So we're not going to use right and left movement at all. We're just going to aim straight up and straight down. But by rolling the ship, you can change what straight up and down and straight up and down means relative to the world you're flying through. So I can move straight up there and aim right for this gate. Now this way of flying is kind of a pain, but it's how you've got to do things with an atmospheric aeroplane, which isn't really very good at yawing. So we're going to head down now, which means we're going to roll upside down, and then we can point our nose down. We can roll and point, roll and point. You can do these in smooth combination. Right, so I might just increase the throttle a little bit. Just go as fast as you're comfortable with. You might crash a bit. It's best to start at really low speed so you can just practice pointing your nose, which might be difficult, especially if you're new to flight sims or to using a joystick, if perhaps you've just bought one of those. Now we go straight up. You can follow these arrows if you want. The best way is, of course, to use a combination of pitch, roll and yaw, because that gives you the most flexibility. For high speed manoeuvring, the best way to do that is basically to pitch upwards, because that's the type of acceleration that the pilot is best equipped to handle. So for a really sharp turn, you usually want to point so that you can basically pitch up for every turn and then roll to line up for the next one. But it's very useful to use a bit of yaw if perhaps you're here, you don't have time to roll, you can just get a bit of yaw in there. Alright, and we're coming up to the end of the first lap. Now the tunnel we're going through here might seem quite narrow, but it in fact has room for several spaceships at a time. But you do need to be quite well lined up with it, so you can basically aim at the next gate right away. So if you're too high, you might think, oh no, and it'll take a bit of practice to avoid crashing into the walls, especially if you're a bit jerky and overcompensating for where you're heading. Alright, so on this next lap we're going to talk about a couple more things. Namely your overall velocity vector, which you can see that there's a kind of a slightly squared circle with a little upwards arrow in it, which is hovering around the crosshair for the nose direction. I'm just going to stop here so you can... Actually, that's still not a very good way to be able to see it. I need to find a nice dark background. There we go. Alright, so you can see the crosshair here. If we go forwards, the box will appear around it, which shows you what direction you're actually heading in, because you're not always heading directly forwards relative to your nose. If I use a bit of vertical strafing in addition to heading forwards, then you'll see that the vector is pointing upwards because I'm heading diagonally forwards. So I'm kind of heading forwards and upwards at the same time. You can control the angle by the proportion of forwards and upwards that you use if you have analog control. Otherwise you can just kind of tap on and off to kind of jerk it sideways and have it right on average. So you can use strafing in combination with other ways of movement in order to point in the right direction. So you want to point your vector, which is called your prograde vector, which is the direction you're heading, and is represented by that little squared circle with the arrow in it, the upwards arrow. You want that to be pointing through these gates. You don't actually need to point your nose through the gates, as long as this thing is pointing through there. Because it looked like I was going to crash into that ring, but in fact I wasn't pointing directly towards my nose. You can have quite an extreme difference. So here I'm pointing quite far down relative to where I'm actually heading. And you can use the same thing to strafe downwards, obviously. I can bring my... you can go sideways as well, so you can be pointing one way and flying another way, so you're flying into a jaunty angle. So I'm aiming for the gate here. You can see, but my nose is at... Oops, sorry, I crashed into that pillar. That was quite unexpected. I'll just try that again. Just have a quick look for the gate. As soon as the HUD comes online, see number 5 there. That's where I'm aiming for, I think. So I'll just quickly fly down there. Yeah, so it takes a bit of practice to kind of know where your ship is relative to things, so that you don't actually collide with them. Your ship is probably smaller than you imagine. So this looks really tight, but if I switch to an external view, it's so again it's several ships width. What is 2 or 3. So there's actually plenty of room to squeeze through. Right, now we're heading up here. So you can see my prograde vector jittering all over the place. Oops, sorry, you got a bit stuck in the corner there. Obviously, if you are heading purely to the right, you won't be able to see your prograde vector because it will be all the way over there to the right. So there you can see it over in the sky, and similarly, if I'm flying straight to the left, there's the prograde vector. So you won't always be able to see it, because you won't always be heading within a cone of angles relative to your nose. So you can use a combination of strafing and aiming your nose to basically get through the course. So I just have a practice, just do a few laps as fast as you're comfortable with. And yeah, just get used to flying with whatever control scheme you want to use. You can experiment. I can just use a bit of strafing there to line up. I was at the right angle, but I wasn't in the right position, so that's where you want to use a bit of strafing. So there's a couple of other flight controls which are quite important. We won't go into decoupled mode here, but a couple of other ones. One is brake. While you hold down brake, all your target velocities will be 0. You don't actually strictly need this in coupled mode, because when you let go of everything and your throttle is set to 0, all your target velocities are already 0, so it won't actually do anything, but it will override your throttle. So if I put my throttle to 44% there, and then I hold down brake, my target velocity will go to 0, but the throttle is still set to 44% when brake is released. So as soon as I release it, I will aim for 44% speed and will accelerate up to that number. You can use this if you think, oh no, I'm heading towards this and I don't know how to access the throttle. You can just hold down brake and you should be quite safe. And then the final thing, which is also quite important, is the boost. While you hold down boost, all your accelerations will be faster. So you'll be able to adjust your velocity vector where you're actually heading. You'll be able to change your momentum in a given direction much more quickly, perhaps twice as fast. This is very useful for getting out of the way of things fast. You can strafe extremely quickly. This is good if you have left it a bit too late to do some manoeuvring. You can go and very quickly change your angle to get where you need, basically. Now you do have a boost meter somewhere that isn't showing up on my HUD for some reason, but you've got a finite amount of fuel, basically, although it does recharge. So if you're travelling at high speed, I'll do a high speed turn here, and you'll see that my velocity vector will actually take a while to catch up with my nose velocity. It just only then caught up. That's because I just crashed a bit there. What was I saying? Yeah, your ship has to actually accelerate in order to travel in a curved arc. It's got to accelerate towards kind of the centre of rotation. This means that when you're turning at any speed higher than 0, will be a very slight difference between where your nose is pointing and where your ship is actually travelling in coupled mode. And the faster you're travelling and the sharper your turn is, the bigger this difference will be. If you do a really sharp turn, like here, it will take a while to catch up. And this could mean that you bang into something, so be careful. While you hold down the boost, you'll accelerate more quickly, and this means that your velocity vector will catch up more quickly with your nose direction. I crashed again.
Origin jumpworks at your service. Core system.
So I'll do a sharp turn when I get out of here, and you'll see how long it takes. I'll just turn through 90 degrees. I'm still drifting, and now I'm on track. I'm going to maximum speed. I'm going to turn 90 degrees, and I'm going to boost, and it gets brought around much more quickly. So you're drifting for a lot shorter distance. So yeah, you can basically kick yourself onto the right path. And you can maneuver very quickly and do really tight turns. This might make you black out a bit, so be careful when doing fast accelerations. Ooh, I'm not quite sure what happened to the camera there. Got a bit confused. Maybe I fully blacked out and lost control of my ship, and that was the just an animation. You've got to watch out for these antennae, I think they are, which will kill you because they're hard to see. Right, so that's basically it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a bit of practice with your pitch roll and yaw. You're adjusting your throttle amount and doing a bit of strafing for fine manoeuvring and helping you get through these rings. Just do a few laps and get as used as you can to flying in this game. Remember to use the brake if you are going to hit something, and use the throttle if you want to stop sliding where you don't want to be sliding. If you want to quickly be travelling where you're pointing, you can use the brake and the throttle at the same time, and that will mean that you decelerate more quickly. Alright, so until next time, Yomi out.